Everybody, thanks for coming back. This is Carol Redden. I appreciate that all of you are with me here today, and I appreciate those of you who've watched the last video. I got lots of feedback, and from some of my students, they said, Carol, we know who you are, but I shared your video with other people and they don't know much about you, so they asked that I share a little bit, and so I'm happy to do that. I have worked in higher education for almost 20 years now. I've primarily worked as a communication instructor. In fact, I started teaching classes related to Microsoft Word and career and professional development. And then when I got a master's degree in communication, I started teaching more communication related topics. At the same time, I worked in a lot of different administrative roles, and I also worked as an academic advisor, and I worked for several years as a director of career services at a smaller college here in Arizona. Shout out to my former students. During that time, I met hundreds of employers and recruiters, HR directors, and I really got a chance to talk to them about what they wanted to see in candidates, what they weren't seeing maybe on resumes and interviews and things like that. And so I've tried to incorporate everything that I learned from them and feedback I've gotten from students over the years into various seminars related to, again, resumes, cover letters, networking, interviewing, and those kinds of topics. And I've integrated those lessons into my classroom as I teach communication, but more often than not, students want more help outside of the classroom. So that's what brought me to this video series today. I've done one video that was on just understanding the importance of formatting as well as content. So if you didn't see that, please check that out. That's kind of an overarching explanation. Today, the plan is to spend more time just talking specifically about formatting to answer hopefully some questions you have, maybe save you some time and hopefully save you money from having to pay somebody else to help you do this. So today we're going to talk about the 3 keys to formatting a winning resume. I just put winning in there because it reminds me of Charlie Sheen winning. It just makes me laugh. But it could be a great resume or a super resume or best or fantastic, whatever you'd like to call it. But the idea is that the resume is going to help you get the interview, and then the interview helps you get the job. So today, as a preview, my students will appreciate this. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about just a few settings you can use, some of the sections that you'll see in a resume, and also a few reminders before you submit your resume. And I'm trying to be really mindful of the time. Some folks said, the last video, I think it was like 10 minutes, and they said it was good, but it was a little bit long. So I'm trying to be mindful of the time, and hopefully this one ends up being a little bit shorter. Again, the focus today is just formatting. I'll have a separate recording for content, just kind of pull that out for you guys so you can watch them separately if you want to. So as far as settings, one of the things I like to talk about is the margins. I don't think a lot of people realize they can manipulate margins. Margins are the white space that you can see here. It's just kind of around. I wasn't sure if you could see my cursor, but it's the area around here. It's like the picture frame of your Word document. For those of you who are maybe don't have as much work experience, I would say go ahead and go with margins that are 1 1/4 inches on each side and maybe 1 inch on the top and the bottom. And that gives you a smaller space to work with, so it looks like you fill it up a little bit more without it being too much white space on the page. Those of you, if you've spent a lot of years in the same field, I know I have, I end up with very narrow margins. And there's a setting in Microsoft Word that says narrow to make them very, very small. So there's very little white space and more room for your content. I also want to make a point for you to be very consistent. Here in a sample that I'm going to show you, you'll see that I have some bullets in there, and wherever I put bullets, in terms of placement, like on the side here, I've got them in the same places throughout in other parts of my resume, and I think that's really helpful and easy for the employer. Keeping in mind, the reason we're paying attention to formatting is that most employers are only going to spend 7 to maybe 10 seconds on your resume. So the idea is that it's so clean, crisp, and sharp that the employer can get in and see what he or she wants to see, find what what they're looking for, and then get back out, and hopefully not onto too many more resumes. Hopefully they stop with yours. But the consistency will really help with that. And when I say consistency, I mean, again, with bullets, with tabs that you set, with font size and type, which we'll talk about in a second, which information you bold versus other information. So consistency is key. Really be mindful of your choices. I would also say don't worry about the length of your resume, because it used to be, there was just this whole understanding that if it was any longer than one page, that's just crazy time. What are you doing? And I don't subscribe to that. I think, in my experience, you should put in as much information as needed to make sure they know you're the best candidate. That doesn't mean willy-nilly you put in a lot of content. That just means you have very purposefully selected your content. But I say that as we're talking about formatting, because that is what plays in some people's minds, is got to keep it to one page. And I would say hogwash, if that's still a thing. Don't worry about that. Put all of your content in, and we'll talk about content later, and then worry about format it. And then if it goes to a second page, it goes to a second page. But as long as everything is valuable, then great, keep it. You just have 2 pages. Some of you will have 3, 4, maybe more. But in most cases, it doesn't need to be that long. And by the way, this is a resume-focused discussion. Others of you in a more professional world, in industry, I should say, might have a CV or a Vita. We can talk about that separately if there's an interest in that. It's very similar, but for most people watching, I think they're going to want to stick with the resume. As far as font type and size, I would say Times New Roman is the most common. That's what I've used here. You could use Arial, you could use Calibri. I don't think it's helpful for you to have scented paper or color paper or creative fonts or images on your resume or a picture on your resume. I don't know that adds. In fact, any of those font choices besides that, like creative font, I think it just takes away from what it is you're trying to drive the employer to, which is your content, what makes you the best candidate. That being said, if you're applying for a creative type of job, then disregard maybe what I just said. Maybe you do, have one of your own graphic designs somewhere in the corner. But then we really kind of branch out and start talking about, should you really have a portfolio, as opposed to trying to put any creative elements in your resume. Okay, so I'm really just talking about, in most cases, you would use probably one of these types of fonts. Okay. Second thing I said I would talk about would be the sections of a resume. Not everybody will have all of these sections. I just kind of wanted to go through them. I want to make sure you can see them all. It looks like you can. The objective. Used to be you had to have an objective. It's just, again, weird if you don't. What is that? Do you not know what your objective is? A lot of the research that I've read says, yeah, it's great if you have one. And if you have one, it should be very purposeful. It should tie exactly to the job or the career that you want, specific employer even. If you can't be specific or figure out what to quantify, like I'd like to apply 6 years of customer service to this customer service job. If you can't figure out how to word that, then maybe just don't have one. It might be a disservice to you, but it's better than something that takes them way off track. If you're just like, I would like a fantastic job that gives me great benefits. As you can imagine, that is not flattering to an employer. So maybe stay away from an objective if you can't figure out how to make it purposeful. As far as skills, great, list them. If you have them, if they're strong and purposeful, meaning they relate to the employer. Some of you will have very technical skills, and maybe that makes sense that you pull that whole section up to the top and you talk about software and hardware, or you talk about clinical skills or legal skills or something like that. Skills is not just a category or a space to just throw stuff in. It's not meant to be like a kitchen sink of like, yeah, I'm going to catch their eyes with all these great things. I would say it actually can take away from. I've heard mixed reviews on employers for skills like teamwork, collaboration, communication skills. I think okay, maybe have a skills section if you can then quantify or demonstrate those skills somewhere else in your resume. But I would not recommend a skills section just for the sake of having one. More is not better. Same with executive summary. Folks generally have an executive summary if they have worked in a lot of years in usually a single industry, and they want to just summarize their experience within that industry. So that's not going to apply to everybody, in which case most of you won't have that. You can, as they say, keep it moving. Education is something most of you will have a section for, even if it's just to list your high school. That being said, I spend more time talking about this later when we cover content. The only time high school should be on your resume is if that's the last bit of education you've achieved. Fantastic, good for you if you did, or if it was a GED. Also, awesome, good for you. But if you have gone to college at all, take high school off of your resume, because we don't want to paint a picture of you as a high school graduate of any amount of time if you have been to college. Okay, so for most of you, if you have gone to school post high school or post GED, then leave high school and GED off of that. But definitely include your high school diploma or your GED if those are the last stops for you as far as education goes. And we'll talk more about what other things you can put in the education section beyond just the words high school diploma in the next video. Most of us are going to have, well, we should all have some kind of section that says professional experience. And I would say, notice that I did not call it work history. That's just because it sounds better. The word professional, if I'm using it to describe myself, even if it's not overt, I'm just sort of suggesting you should see me as a professional too. Work history sounds like, there's some stuff I did, at some point in my life, and hopefully you like it. I'm being dramatic, of course, but it sounds better. Some of you in some industries, you have clinical experience or technical experience. So instead of just having a professional experience section, maybe yours says clinical experience, and then underneath it, it says related experience, meaning here's my other professional stuff that wasn't in a hospital or wasn't in an IT capacity, right? But for most of us, our section is gonna be called professional experience, okay? And again, I'll talk to you about choices for formatting here in just a minute in those sections. I recommend having a civic engagement section. This is just another word for volunteering or another phrase, just because it's more of a buzz phrase than volunteering. But I will say, if I look at 100 resumes, probably 8 of them are not going to have any volunteer experience on them. And it's not because those people didn't volunteer, probably. It's because they didn't know they could or should put it on their resume. I would really start paying attention, especially if you are recareering for any reason, or you're a new graduate or about to be a new graduate. Try to start volunteering, even if it's just one day a year. You do the Susan G. Komen race, or you volunteer at, St. Vincent de Paul, during the holidays to feed people. Put those things on your resume, start keeping track of them. And it's not meant to, for the other person to give you a pat on the back as much as it is to show who you are, show who your spirit is and what it is you're about. But yes, it does add value for an employer. Many times employers say, it's really hard to get people to show up. It's really hard to get people to want to do their job. And someone who has volunteer work suggests that not only do I do my job maybe, but I go out and I do more than. I like doing things, and I like doing things to help others. And that being said, I don't mean, even if it's, like I said, it doesn't have to be directly related to your career path. It can be helping animals or the homeless. It just shows that you're willing to do more. And it could be the thing that connects you to the employer if you get an interview, right? So I would definitely work toward having a civic engagement section on your resume. And then, of course, military experience. For those of you who have military experience, I recommend having this on your resume and calling attention to it. In some cases, you might even have this above your professional experience or your related experience, depending on jobs that you're seeking. But definitely include those sections as they apply. In terms of general reminders, prioritize your sections, right? So whatever's most important to that employer should be listed toward the top. In a lot of cases, it's going to be education, because that's what you're doing now. You're finishing, you're about to graduate, or you just graduated, usually from college, right, or some kind of program. So that is going to be toward the top. If your experience is more valuable in that moment in time for that employer, then put those sections at the top. Okay, so just prioritize. As you think about whether or not you want lines and different bullets, I don't suggest getting too crazy with formatting, but if you will save your document as a PDF file, it just locks that formatting for you, so that when you do submit it, the employers aren't going to see, scattered formatting that comes across, really odd to them. The last reminder I would have would be to label it purposefully. And that would be something, here I've called my file the 3 keys to formatting. if I were applying for a job, I would name it Carol Redden _ job title, or Carol Redden _ this particular institution. That helps me remember what I sent that entity for that job. It also helps them see me as the candidate for that job, right? So it adds clarity. You should be revising your resume for each job and for each employer. That's just a given. It's much easier to say, oh, I have one resume for all of these accounting jobs and let's see what sticks. You can do that, but the reality is most of it's not going to stick. So you've done yourself a disservice by saving yourself some time. I don't recommend just trying to use a one-size-fits-all when it comes to your resume. It really should be purposeful and personalized to the employer. As a quick review, we talked about settings, some of the things you can change to better suit your outcome, how you want your resume to look. Talked about the specific sections, and then I gave you a few reminders. The other thing that I wanted to do was just quickly show you a sample resume. And I know you guys can't see this wording, it's too small, but what I did want to show you just at a quick glance is the formatting of what it could look like. This is not a lot of formatting choices, but it is very specific. The reason I made it this small to start with is so you could see that I'm unnecessarily having a second page. I just have this little bit of wording on the second page. And remember how before I said you can change your margins, which is this white space. I think you guys can see, yeah. This person could shrink these margins so that everything comes up a little bit. The person could shrink the space between these lines and that would bring it up a little bit. Or in some cases, you can be more purposeful about your bullets, the actual items that you put under each area, and that could bring it up a little bit. So for example, this person is looking for a maintenance supervisor job. Maintenance assistant is one job, demolition, service advisor. So those are all related. And then here we have one here that says cook. Well, when you have a job that's not directly related to the new job that you want, and I'll talk more about this later, you don't have to provide 6-8 bullets about that job. Just pick out the few key things that could be of value to that future employer. So attendance might be really great. I think it's probably obvious that the person prepared food is necessary. So if I were looking at this, I'd say, okay, let's delete that. And then right away you see, oh, we're actually already on one page. So we really don't need to change anymore. I would still go back and look at all the word choices here, the content, and make sure it was worded really well. Again, I'll talk about that in a minute. But as far as formatting, I want to draw your attention to a few things. One, notice that this is in the header section, which is the name, phone number, and email. You could have other things, which we'll talk about when we get to content, but notice that the name is much larger than everything else. That's on purpose. And oftentimes I would say put it in bold, just so it pops off the page and stands out. You don't have to have a line here. I personally like having it. You would just go to insert and then shapes and then choose the line feature if that's what you wanted to do. I talk about what information goes here, and I'll talk about that in the next video, but I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that this is in the header section, and that's why it looks gray. Putting your information in the header section does a couple of things. One, it helps us to think about you and yourself as a brand or an entity because it looks like letterhead, so that's a good thing. Secondly, if you do go to a second page, because you have put this information in the header section, it's going to be at the top of every page. You don't have to type it in, and it won't be left out. That's something I've experienced many times in my career when I go to hire people. If I print out a set of resumes and I don't know who the second and third pages belong to, and then it's very frustrating. So using the header section will save everybody some time and energy. I mentioned the objective, and again, we'll talk more about what to put in that section as far as content, but this is what it might look like. Professional experience was the next section that made the most sense for this person. We didn't have a skills section. We didn't have an executive summary. We didn't have a core competencies section. So we just went right into professional experience. What I want to point out in this section, and this would be true if you had military, you'll see it's true when we have education, and it's true if you have a civic engagement section. You want to ask yourself, what's most important? Is it the name of the company or is it the job title? And only you can answer that based on the field you want to go into in the employer. So if in this industry, if the company I worked for is incredibly valuable, every other employer recognizes that one for greatness, then yeah, I probably want to have that employer's name in bold and maybe not so much bold my title. But if there was something about my title that added more value than the company name, then I want to go ahead and bold this bit of information and not bold my employer name. Because if I make them both bold, then neither stand out. And the whole point of formatting is to draw attention to what's the most purposeful. And then you'll see, I just recommend, I'm going to undo that so that it goes back to original. I recommend just kind of carrying over the bold to this side just for consistency's sake. Okay. Again, we'll talk more about listing the dates and why they look the way they do. But I also want to draw your attention to the bullets. Bullets work really well because they're not full sentences. Nobody wants to read a full sentence. They just want to get in and get out, and bullets allow them to do that. So all of the bullets in all of my sections align. That's on purpose. That's not, willy-nilly. It just worked out that way. And whatever choice I made here, if I decided all my company names would be more valuable, then those are the things I bolded in each entry after that. Okay. For this particular person, he didn't necessarily want to pull out skills and didn't yet have a civic engagement section. So he just included his education, and his education was not more valuable than his work experience. So we put it to the very bottom. We want to show, yes, he does have a high school diploma, but that was not more valuable than his years already in the maintenance field. So we did put that here. You would list the high school name, of course, bold, just as you did here, because here you had entity names in bold. So we would have that here. And then we would have the rest of this unbolded. That gives you just a look, again, a quick glance. I think what we did with this resume, honestly, was we put all of the content in here, and the content actually takes more time than formatting. But just to make a choice on what do I want to bold, what font type do I want to use, am I going to right align things? Notice that we right aligned them so that we're making good use of this white space and we create a balance. Once you make those choices and then you start formatting each section, you'll find that it goes very quickly. And even though I'm suggesting you change your content a little bit for each resume that you give to each employer, shouldn't have to change much. Once you do the work to get your formatting the way you want and you get a baseline of your content or a good starting place, each and every time after that, it's just about making small revisions. So it shouldn't be really taxing or time consuming for you to get a new resume draft once you get started, with a good template. I hope that's been helpful for you guys. Again, today it was just a bit more about formatting. If there's anything else you'd like to see covered or me to go, in more depth on, I absolutely will. My next video is going to be about the content, do's and don'ts in terms of how to list it, where to list it, and what to list. If you've got any other questions or comments, please provide them below. Feel free to share, like, subscribe. I'm hoping to help as many people with this information as possible. I hope to hear from you guys soon. Thanks so much. Have a great day.